Welcome to Culti-Bragan Camp. From 1948 to 2004, this was a Ministry of Defence training camp. You can still see the remains of the rifle range and the assault course, which has now been taken over by the community orchard. But long before these trees were planted, countless cadets and soldiers stayed here during training manoeuvres in the surrounding hills. Their messes, ablution blocks and dorms were in drafty Nissen huts like this one. Often curious about the history of the place, several of them reported having eerie experiences. Lying awake in bed at night, they would hear the sound of German voices singing. But few of them ever discovered the true stories of Culti-Bragan's past as prisoner of war camp 21. Stories of Nazi revenge attacks and murder.
The Allies are sweeping northern France clear of the Nazis. The British and Canadians on the left flank pinned down large forces of the enemy on the hinge of the German retreat. Our advance was at first slow and unspectacular by comparison with the overwhelming of Brittany and the drive towards Paris. But it was the grim struggle here that made possible the triumphant advance on the right. The RAF found time to drop leaflets urging the Germans to surrender now that they are hopelessly outfought in the air.
Soldiers captured in battle suffer from shock. They have endured the trauma of fighting and are often plagued by survivor's guilt. Now they must come to terms with being in the hands of the enemy. Many would be relieved to be away from the fighting, but for some, especially the SS, who were expected to fight to the death, surrender could only be a source of shame. They were reluctant to accept that for them, the war was over. In the summer and autumn of 1944, as the Allies fought their way across France, they captured thousands of German soldiers daily. The prisoners were to be treated according to the rules laid out by the Geneva Convention. They were interrogated for military information and quickly removed from the vicinity of the fighting to temporary cages at the coast to await transport across the sea. For the first time in the war, Britain was to house its share of prisoners of war in camps in Britain. Once across the Channel, the prisoners were escorted to a reception camp, such as that at Kempton Park Racecourse. There they were deloused, given medical checks, interrogated once more, and categorized according to their supposed political leanings, before being sent to a base camp. Although the Nazis were not to be allowed out to work, it was hoped that the others would provide a much-needed replacement for Britain's own depleted agricultural workforce. Very few, however, volunteered to work. Many that did were badly beaten by their countrymen on their return. Hardline Nazi prisoners wrested control of the camps from within. They formed Rollkommandos, raiding parties, which continued to uphold the tenets of National Socialism even behind enemy barbed wire. The authorities struggled to cope with the sheer numbers of prisoners arriving. New camps were being built and old ones extended all across Britain, but there were shortages of guards and suitable accommodation.
In November 1944, there was a sudden spate of escape attempts from camps all over the country. 3 men got as far as Holyhead, where they were apprehended attempting to board a steamer to neutral Ireland. They had travelled in trains, eaten in restaurants, exchanged money, and even bought new clothes. The consternation that this caused, however, was as nothing, compared to a plot discovered whilst interrogating escapees at Camp 23 in Devizes. Such was the scale of this plot that Churchill himself was alerted.
They've been interrogating the escapees at the prisoner of war camp in Devizes. Security there seems to have been particularly lax. An SS man named Goltz says he's already been out 3 times, once by apparently simply sauntering through the open gates. He claims that other prisoners regularly pop next door to the American hospital to pilfer food. Some escapees have returned with tales of tank depots and airfields. 2 other SS men claim to have actually sat in an aeroplane. Fortunately, they couldn't work out how to fly the thing. Anyway, All of this seems to have inspired a Luftwaffe man called Wunderlich to formulate a grand plan for the mass breakout of all 7,000 prisoners. They plan to seize arms and march on London.
How do we know all this?
One of the escapees, a man called Storch, he told his interrogators, apparently in hope of more lenient treatment. He's been reporting back daily through our network of informants ever since. We know every detail of the plot. 6 men are to go through the wire and cut the telephone lines between the sentry boxes. The gate is to be opened and the guard disarmed quietly. Then Storch is to lead some 200 men to the barracks in the American hospital adjacent to the camp. There they plan to obtain arms, some 50 or 60 lorries, and food. He has assigned German panzer personnel to seize control of the US tank depot in the vicinity, whilst his Luftwaffe personnel are to proceed to the nearby airfield. Within 4 hours, they intend to liberate every German from every camp within a 60-mile radius of London. They're calling it the Third Front. Oh, and they're expecting airborne and seaborne support from Germany.
Poppycock! How on earth do they hope to relay that to Germany?
Wunderlich claims to have met 2 German agents disguised as British soldiers who are in contact with Germany through a secret radio. 2 airborne divisions are to be dropped in support of the escaped prisoners.
Well, that's preposterous!
Oh, I quite agree, sir. The trouble is, if it were true, it would confirm the order from German High Command that we intercepted, asking for English-speaking volunteers for a special operation.
This was what they meant. A parachute drop over England to help in the mass escape of German prisoners of war.
Oh, I know, sir. It's quite improbable.
Preposterous.
But just quite possibly true.
All leave for the guards was cancelled over Christmas. Local army units were put on standby. Hospital staff were issued with sidearms. Additional perimeter fencing was erected and lighting installed. And then, on the 12th of December, a Hitler Order of the Day was distributed throughout the camp. Men of the freedom movement, the hour of our liberation has approached, and it is the duty of every German to fight once more, arms in hand, against world Jewry. I demand of every German man that he fight for his fatherland without hesitation. The time had come to act. British paratroopers were sent in to give a show of force and to deter all thoughts of future escape. 23 of the ringleaders were taken to the London cage run by Colonel Scotland, in whose care no one would choose to find themselves. There were many means he employed to get to the truth. Sleep deprivation, humiliation, and violence were among them. Storch declared that he had blown the whistle on the plot because he didn't trust to Wunderlich's abilities. He thought that the plan was doomed to failure. As for claims of German agents, secret wireless stations, and airborne and seaborne support from Germany, Wunderlich admitted to having made them all up. He had invented them merely to inflate his own importance in the eyes of his comrades and to render the plot more impressive. However, it came to light that whilst Storch was playing his double role, he was formulating his own secret escape plans to be implemented at a future date and to involve some 600 or 700 German prisoners of war. The authorities heaved a sigh of relief. They were only too aware, though, that had Storch not turned traitor, the consequences could have been grave. Storch's own escape plan could have come to fruition in an armed uprising. So, where to send the Devizes plotters? Somewhere far away from trouble. To Scotland, to Camp 21. The authorities had recently received some frightening intelligence about this particular camp. An interview conducted just days before suggested that the Nazis would find themselves very much at home there.
First of all, I was at a transit camp. After that, we went up to Camp 21 at Comrie in Scotland. That was at the beginning of October. At Comrie, there were 4 compounds. B and C were the officers' compounds. There were about 1,000 officers in each. They were all mixed together, wahllos, at random, just as they had been captured. Navy men, SS officers, Fallschirmjäger, paratroopers, railwaymen, Todt labor organization members. At this camp, the paratroopers and the SS had organized a system of spying on the other officers, a sort of secret police. And if they recognized a man who had ever once spoken against Hitler, they pounced on him and beat him in the night. It was organized terrorism. I was in Compound C. Compound B was much worse. There, the compound leader had to take 6, maybe 7 men into Schutzhaft, protective custody. If he had not done that, they would have been murdered. They had terrific fights at this camp as well. They punched one officer in the jaw so hard that it was dislocated. They tried to strangle another officer during the night, squeezing his throat. They maltreated another one like that too.
6 days after this conversation, a death was recorded at Camp 21. Major Willy Thorn was found hanged. The authorities recorded a verdict of suicide, but the circumstances were described as suspicious. And so it was to here, the Camp 21, now known as the Black Camp of the North, that the Devizes plotters were sent 2 days later, brimming with rage and frustration. They were put into Compound B. Among their number was one Feldwebel Rosterg. He had had no involvement in the plot. He had worked in administration as an interpreter for the British, and he was no supporter of Hitler. They arrived between 10 and 11 a.m. on the 22nd of December. By 9 a.m. the next day, Feldwebel Rosterg was dead. He had been tried as a traitor, brutally beaten, and his body hanged from a pipe in the latrines. The Scottish Guards paraded Rosterg's body for all to see. The compound leader recorded a verdict of suicide, but one soldier jumped out of line and declared that it had been murder. In the ensuing investigation, the police met with a wall of silence. The prisoners were either too scared to come forward, or else they genuinely believed that Rosterg had been a spy for the British and deserved to be hanged. The case was handed back to the military. Slowly, bit by bit of evidence was assembled, and 12 suspects were arrested. 8 were tried in London in July 1944. 6 were condemned, and 5 were hanged at Pentonville Prison in October. 3 of them had come from Devizes.